This is difficult, a lot of moving parts.
Welcome to On Deadline, the Washington Examiner's political game show. I'm Tiana Lowe-Desher.
And I'm Christian Daytalk.
Each week we discuss the biggest trending topics in news and we give our opinions. You in the comments get to vote with whom you agree. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends. Christian, we begin this week above the fold with the biggest story, in our opinion. Can you tell us about why Donald Trump wants to give a tariff-funded bailout to the farmers?
Well, this is pretty straightforward, Tiana, and essentially, back when the president was announcing all of his tariffs, including sectoral and these wider Liberation Day reciprocal slates, he got a bunch of blowback from farmers because naturally, you would think, in response to the president's tariffs, other countries would place tariffs of their own, specifically on American agricultural products. We fast forward a few months to just a few weeks ago, and China has ended, for the first time in 20 years, all purchases of U.S. soybeans. It's more than a quarter of all U.S. soybean production in the States, and instead, they are now purchasing soybeans from Brazil, a country that has some 50% roughly tariff rate put on them by the Trump administration. So it does seem like the president is trying to solve a problem of his own creation, because you have to imagine, most of these farmers are in red states, and even the farmers in the blue states, they voted heavily for Trump. That's just the way things go. I don't make the rules about regional demographics. That being said, we've heard a lot from Brooke Rollins, from the White House. We're going to be putting together some type of aid package. We heard it, back in the spring. We're hearing it now again, but there are numbers attached to it, with, the most conservative estimate being a bailout of some $50 billion directly to those ag producers. And on the one hand, this makes sense. Sure, we are pursuing a radical policy change. We need to, account for the people who will be, impacted negatively greater than the wider population. But my understanding is that this doesn't make sense for any number of reasons. So Tiana, this doesn't seem like the worst idea. You want to take care of Americans when you're implementing new policies. But experts like yourself have been voicing concern about this. What's your biggest qualm with this proposed bailout?
The short answer is that the revenue from the tariffs has already been spent. Mm-hmm. About $6 of every $7 that comes into the U.S. Treasury is already spent only on Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and interest on our already existing national debt. So when you're posting a deficit that's this big with interest costs that have grown 8% year over year, it means that the Treasury would have to finance new debt in order to fund this. So already, bad idea, because the revenue isn't sitting in a magic lockbox. That's not how Washington works. Secondarily, markets are kind of viewing the tariffs right now as temporary liabilities, because we will see in the future the Supreme Court in November consider the challenge to the IEEPA tariffs. Those are those national, non-sector specific reciprocal tariffs. Mm-hmm. And that's about half of all the increased tariff revenue that's come in. If SCOTUS overturns those tariffs, there's a chance that they say Treasury has to pay them back, which means not only would they have to pay back, $100 billion in tariffs. If you create another $50 billion hole, you've added another $150 billion to the deficit,
right.
Potentially more than that. But really, the biggest issue, and the reason why you at home should care, is that this jacks up the rate on your mortgage. If you're shopping for a new house, it jacks up your credit card rate. Donald Trump, as we know, has been obsessed with the idea of bringing down interest rates. And we have discussed for many reasons why the Federal Reserve only controls a very short end of the curve. Only very short-term Treasury bills, 1-month Treasuries. It does not influence the long-term interest rates that determine not only how we finance the federal debt, but also how that trickles down to the consumer. And we know from the last time Trump did a farm bailout that it did not end well, and we were in a very different fiscal position. So the first time Trump did his farm bailout, that was in 2018, and that pushed that 10-year Treasury yield from 2.8% to 3.2% within 3 months. 3.2% That, I mean, anyone in this White House would cut off a limb in order to get that. We're looking at a well over 4% 10-year Treasury yield. If right now, the only reason why these bond investors are letting the federal government borrow at still a relatively low interest rate across all federal borrowing, Uncle Sam's being charged like 3.4% on borrowing. The only reason why the bond market hasn't freaked out about the tariffs is because they believe that the tariff revenue is going to put a little dent in that national debt.
Yeah.
Because that's what Donald Trump has said. That's the entire basis of the National Emergency Declaration for, at least as it's being argued to SCOTUS. It's why they're saying you cannot undo these because we are relying on this revenue to fill a hole. And it means that ever so slightly, the increase in deficit spending is slightly less than what Joe Biden was doing at this point in 2024, but barely. And the only reason why that's the case is the tariffs.
Yeah.
So, what that means practically, let's say Donald Trump gets his way, Congress somehow allows him to do a bailout with funds that they didn't even authorize the collection of. I don't understand legally how that makes sense. Let's say he spends $50 billion on a farm bailout that the farmers warned Trump already, don't do the tariffs. Okay, we pay them off. SCOTUS overturns the IEEPA tariffs. We have to give $100 billion back. We've added $150 billion to the national debt. The bond market freaks out, and all of a sudden those borrowing costs, we've seen the 10-year hit 5%. Every, tenth of a percentage point of increased interest rates corresponds to hundreds of billions of dollars each year just in new borrowing costs. Mm-hmm. And this is where I always ask the question, what the hell are the Democrats doing?
That's a very good question, and I think naturally the immediate reaction is to jump to the political ramifications of any action like this. I think the Democrats, to their credit, are focused on the government shutdown right now. That being said, this is playing out exactly how they could have only hoped it could have played out, right? One, you have the legal challenges and the potential that this could blow up quite literally in Donald Trump's face. Two, you've got the president implementing new policies, realizing, oh, this is going to screw over my voters. Yeah. Now I have to scramble and try and cut the legs out from under myself just to appease them. I think they're in the best position here. And now I say that relatively because, again, what's bad for the economy is bad for all of us. And certainly, again, at length, we talk about how important it is to have two strong parties in the two-party system. That being said, I do want to see more out of Democrats in terms of messaging on this, not only because I think it's important to talk about policy, not just politics, in discussing Washington, D.C., but because, again, the polling at this point in time is on their side, right?
Yes.
Let's flash back to January 20th. Trump comes in office. His two biggest polling outliers by far, the economy and immigration. And now, in most, if not every single poll, he is underwater on both of those issues. There was concern, there was confusion about how will the implementation of the tariffs actually play out. Well, we're 6 months after Liberation Day at this point in time, and we've got a very clear idea of what's happening. Not only is it not followed through to the same extent that the president is saying, and when I say that, I mean we're not bringing in $1 trillion in tariff revenue every month, even though the president is telling you that in every single speech, including like the one he gave in Norfolk, Virginia, on an aircraft carrier, which was pretty cool on Sunday. But he's also not even doing with the tariff revenue what he said he was going to be doing. The goals and the strategy behind these tariff tactics are played out, and now it's time for Democrats to step up if they are a serious party and actually want to object to the president's agenda rather than do so in a way that can help them get through a Democratic primary in New York City. This is the time. Do you think this is a hole the president can get out of? Because it, like we just outlined, with the farmers in particular, he's kind of damned if he does, damned if he doesn't. He either, sells those people out to dry and essentially sticks to his tariffs and risks political blowback on Republicans, or he courts those people and undermines his tariff strategy and isn't able to reshore manufacturing or pay down the national debt or do any of these things that he said he wants to do with the tariff revenue.
I mean, you say the tariff strategy, and I think the issue is that 6 months in, we still don't know what the hell the strategy is. There was that period in time where it seemed like, okay, the goal are trade deals. And there are some countries that do deserve to have more restrictive trade deals still because they refuse to play ball.
She's saying India. She's saying India.
Maybe I'm saying India. But if you have countries like Vietnam that are willing to say, we want to go to zero tariffs, we want to remove all the non-tariff barriers, we will take in 99% of your agricultural goods, and you don't take them up on it, I don't think that's much of a strategy. I think the end game is here, and the end game sucks. The end game is that Trump is negative 30 points on tariff policy and about negative 20 on inflation. And we know it's not that the tariffs themselves are inflationary, but they inhibit growth in a way that makes it harder to fight the inflation that already exists. And so with Democrats, you could see a Clinton-era Democrat running not just as a free trader under the correct assumption that most Americans view themselves as consumers first, right? Most Americans do not work in manufacturing, and also manufacturing jobs have collapsed by about 80,000, I think, since Trump took office. But also, just if you really want to do the no kings thing, I cannot think of a more unconstitutional usurpation of power executed by Trump in a way that no other Democrat has actually attempted than taking Congress's Article 1 power to impose import duties and levy taxes. And it just seems like the most obvious strategy in the world. And I get that it's because part of the left is salivating over a President AOC using the exact same IEPA powers to tariff people over climate change and tariff them over whatever, left-wing pet project will emerge by 2028. But I would hope that common sense liberals realize, why would we trust the executive branch with this much power? Like, why wouldn't we want to take this power back? And right now, it's just going kind of unchecked.
Yeah, it's a good question, and certainly one we'll be focused on over the next month because the Supreme Court is hearing a case on the president's, nation-focused tariffs the first week of November. That being said, it's time for us now to play Yays or Nays, a segment where we get to give our opinions, on the other big news in politics this week.
Trump will have finalized a Gaza ceasefire deal by the end of the week.
This is difficult. A lot of moving parts. I'm going to say yes with an asterisk, but I think it's important to recognize we've been in this position before, essentially. We've had Israel and Hamas at the negotiating table, both parties given initial approval of a ceasefire plan, both put forward by President Trump and former President Biden. And then here we are, into the war, essentially, and it's difficult because on the one hand, I think everyone other than Hamas wants to see the killing in Gaza end.
Yeah.
Full stop. That being said, there really is no incentive for Hamas to play ball here because let's look at that 20-point peace plan for starters, and a couple of the points in there virtually legislate Hamas out of existence. They have to give up all of their arms. They have to leave Gaza. They have to promise, the current leadership structure not to engage in hostilities against Israel from any position to from which they move to. And what's in it for them, essentially, right? It's agreeing to end the fighting and essentially agreeing to end yourselves as any type of organization. And yes, they're a terrorist group, whatever, but they are a group and they do have thousands of supporters. So I just don't really get it. I mean, Israel and their invasion of Gaza City, that obviously is putting pressure on Hamas, but it's also putting pressure on Israel from the rest of the global community not to engage in war crimes and not to be the terrorists, right? So I just don't understand. I think there will be progress, and we've got this meeting on Monday in Egypt between the involved parties. The U.S. is sending a delegation. I think one of your favorite Trump administration folks.
It's the
is going
reason
over
why
there.
I'm a yes.
Okay, all right, take it away, Queen.
Well, the reason why I'm a yes is because the witless Steve Witkoff has finally been effectively sidelined, and Trump has He went to Jared's. Jared Kushner is back. Taking a
good.
break from hanging out with Kim Kardashian and Jay-Z and Beyonce and Lauren Sanchez and Jeff Bezos. Jared Kushner is where he was meant to be, and that is doing diplomacy for Daddy Trump. Okay, we all made fun of Jared Kushner first term. He said, I've read like 25 books on Palestine and Israel, and I'm going to bring about peace. And guess what he did? He did the Abraham Accords. He did the thing.
I'm going to cut in. It's actually the Abraham Accords, as Donald Trump likes to call it.
The Abraham Accords. Jared being there is a sign that Trump is done with the BS. So Witkoff's errors have been publicized. Everyone has made fun of them. Relying on the Kremlin's translator, assuming that a member of the Kremlin was part of U.S. embassy staff. In an interview, in a profile he did with The Economist, he admitted that he did not realize that one of the primary goals was getting Hamas out of Gaza until August.
Not a great
For
admission.
reference, that is 2 months ago.
Yeah.
So the fact that you have Jared back in there is crucial in terms of signaling we're going to get this done. But also, it's because of a large amount of international buy-in.
Yeah.
Witkoff has not been able to whip the stakeholders in the region.
The other Arab nations.
Yeah, and you need their buy-in because the fact is that I don't think Hamas agrees to the ceasefire so much as the other Arab nations make him.
Yeah.
Part of that is giving them a permission structure so their own civilians don't overthrow them. Like, this is a big concern, seriously, with the Jordanians, where the Jordanian monarchy is old enough to remember the last time they invited Palestinian refugees into Jordan, and they were almost overthrown. So even though nobody wants Hamas in power, they can't outright say, we hate Hamas, we want to get rid of them. There are very few people that have the temerity to say that, and in the cases they do, it's like the war criminal that's now kind of our friend that's in charge of Syria.
Yeah.
So the fact that you have everyone else around them ready to say, okay, we accept this deal. And again, like the humanitarian interest, everyone should obviously want the end of this. Everyone wants the hostages released. Everyone wants to make sure that every civilian in Gaza that is willing to lay down arms and is not, a top member of Hamas gets access to the food and medical care that they need. No one's fighting this. And crucially, Trump's also trying to set the stage for the day one after the war, economically.
Yeah.
And, this is one where, the corruption might actually be kind of useful as opposed to, counterintuitive. Yes, Jared is heavily financially involved with the Saudis. Ordinarily, that's not a good thing when it comes to, just basic ethical standards of being in government. In this case, it's a little helpful because it means the Saudis will want to invest. Right now, Gaza's kind of a parking lot right now. If you want to get buildings back, as Trump always says, beautiful real estate, waterfront real estate. You could have the greatest resorts, But seriously, it's like the fact you have Jared as a stakeholder with a Saudi sovereign wealth fund.
Yeah, no.
That's a good thing.
I think that's actually a pretty salient point and answers my question of what is bringing them to the table. They don't get anything out of this. It's not that they're looking to get something out of this at this point, or they stand to get something out of this. It's like you said, everyone else in the room loves this deal and wants buy-in, not only for regional security reasons, but for economic reasons, like you're pointing out. And who were the first two countries in the Middle East to jump on and approve this plan? Number one, Saudi Arabia, the big dog in the room, and number two, Qatar, where all of Hamas leadership currently lives and operates. So they're really left without any options at this point in time. And I can be cynical and say it's probably going to break down again, but really no one wants to see that. And I think it is time the adults in the room in any of the respective countries say, hey, enough bloodshed. We have to move forward. And I will give Trump credit here. This 20-point peace plan, specifically the provisions about rebuilding Gaza, looks a lot more like what the pro-Palestinian activists wanted than what Donald Trump and Bibi Netanyahu announced in his first week in office when he's going to be like, oh, we're going to make it the Mar-a-Lago, the Middle East Riviera, Gaza-Lago. So baby steps, baby.
Yeah. Wait, exit question.
Progress. Yes, shoot.
Where does Hamas go? Qatar, or does Putin send a plane down so they can shack up with Assad in Russia?
I don't know. That's a good question. Can Putin really pay them with all of the sanctions coming on the Russian energy?
Putin's next.
Sector? I don't know. How about this? They're going to split between the Philippines, shout out, my home country, also low-key one of the most militant Islamic terror nations in the world.
Most people don't know that.
Or Sudan. So, whatever.
Now it's time for us to fill in the blank.
J. Jones's text messages are less important than blank for the Virginia elections.
Before we give our answers, let's give a little bit of backstory about, one, who J. Jones is, because you probably might not know at home. He is the Democratic nominee for Attorney General in Virginia. You learn something new every day. And over the weekend, a pretty significant scandal broke about bad text messages he sent to other state representatives just after he left the State House in 2022, where he essentially said he wanted to assassinate then State House leader Gilbert, who is a Republican. And these are bad, and especially in the wake of the Charlie Kirk assassination, talks of violence in political discourse have been a hot topic issue. But let's look at what he actually said. He said, if there are three people in a room, Gilbert, Hitler, and I actually forgot who the third one was. Pol Pot. I'm reserving 2 bullets to put in Gilbert's head. Not really much
wish for
wiggle
the death
room
of
there.
his children, who I wanted to double check because I'm like, maybe they're like adult children who are also in politics. Nope, school-age children.
Yeah.
So that's...
It's gross. It's not good. It's kind of exactly what we, the two of us, want to get away from as we are discussing politics as an entire country. But I'm going to be honest, I don't really think this is going to influence the race at all. And I can tell you why. Virginia. State, heard of it, it's pretty close. A lot of federal workers there, a lot of federal workers who have already been laid off and who might, that number might increase as the president pursues these government shutdown layoffs. Unemployment in Virginia this year is up some 30% compared to 2024. The near entirety of that is due to these federal workers being axed by the Trump administration.
And that's probably an underestimate because of the shutdown.
Yeah,
because
that's
the
correct.
BLS is not giving us the actual unemployment rate by state.
And quite literally, we talk about this all the time. During the Glenn Youngkin, Virginia race, like sure, school issues, were at the forefront of voters' minds. But everything comes back to the economy. And when economic sentiment is poor and the outlook for next year is even worse, and you've lost your job, I don't see a lot of loyalty among these Republicans in the federal workforce or who were in the federal workforce and going forward and voting for the guys who just upended their entire family life. I just don't see that happening. And I do think, like we talked about at the top and above the fold, this is a problem solely created by the Trump administration, and Republicans are going to pay the penalty next November.
So Christian, like you, I'm really cynical about these text messages. I find them horrific. If I were in charge of a political party, this would be probably one of the easiest things to make me say, you need to drop out. Not only do we disavow your campaign, you're done in politics. Unfortunately, not one Democrat from Virginia agrees. Abigail Spanberger is, after a little bit, the texts were bad. That's why you need to vote for us and J. Jones, which is kind of bull, if you ask me. And also just the polling on political violence, it hasn't gotten better, it's gotten worse. We have this poll from the Skeptic Research Foundation that shows 44% of voters that identify as very liberal say violence is often necessary to create social change. Also, half of all Gen Z liberals. It's very scary when you look down by age. So I think the era of not wishing violence on your political opponents is unfortunately waning. Not, it's not a problem that's getting better. Which is why I think if there's one silver lining for Republicans in Virginia, because they are facing the headwinds of DOGE and the federal layoffs, also the fact that unlike 2021, Joe Biden is not in office, Trump is. So the incumbent party in power, they get correctly more credit for what's going on that's good and blame for what's going on that's bad. I would say if there's anything that can save Virginia, Republicans, that I certainly think will matter more to closing the margin at minimum than these J. Jones text messages, the exact same stuff that helped Glenn Youngkin in 2021. The schools and the transanity. By the transanity, I do not mean transgender people in Virginia or transgender adults identifying as such or using pronouns or in private places being allowed to use a bathroom. I'm talking about taxpayer-funded spaces and specifically schools. Back in 2021, there was one massive scandal, and that was the Loudoun County bathroom rape scandal. It was one scandal. It was horrific. The girl in question this was a high school girl who was raped in a girl's bathroom by a boy wearing a skirt. It was a pretty disgusting scandal, and just like the fact that it was so new as a concept really helped push Glenn Youngkin over the finish line. Mm-hmm. Now we have about 7 or 8 of these different scandals, right? So we have in Loudoun County a group of boys who were penalized for saying they didn't want to share the boys' changing room with a biological girl that identifies as trans. Loudoun County policy, they're fighting to keep gender identity the basis for intimate facilities, including underage changing rooms. Fairfax County, this is the big one, and it's one that we at the Examiner have been covering a lot just because it's so local to us. Fairfax County refuses to charge Richard Cox, who is a person that identifies as transgender, a registered sex offender of, I think he was originally convicted before I was born. He was keeping child porn on his phone next to the schedules of girls' swim practices in the rec centers in the regions. Would go to the Fairfax County publicly funded rec centers and expose himself to underage minor girls. Okay, so here's my question, Christian. As a liberal who I think if, Sarah McBride came in here, I think you and I would both be fine calling her Sarah and using Miss, whatever. Is this a woman or a man?
That's a criminal who is a man, by the way.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's easy. And if any other Democrat could say, we will respect people's personal choices among adults in private life, but for all intents and purposes, when we see a man, this is not allowed in a publicly funded locker room. I think one of the things that last week J.K. Rowling went viral for, a big tweet thread she did because it's part of her feud with Emma Watson over the trans issues thing. But the major point that J.K. Rowling made was that I think it's easy for us to forget, is that the trans stuff, the spaces that we really fight for are the ones that need to be accessible to the least privileged women in society. Things like taxpayer publicly funded rec centers, where homeless women use the showers. Literally, that is where taxpayers spend money for homeless women, and especially homeless moms, to use showers and have shelter. Public schools. If you're rich, you can always send your kids to private school if you don't want them to have to share a changing room with a man. Rape shelters, prisons, all of that. And that's why this matters. Is this the most important issue in the polling according to Virginians? No. The economy is still always number one. That is true. Is this an issue that I want to care about? Also no. I'm pretty squishy on a lot of the social stuff. I really don't want to care. I do not want to have to care about your personal life. But the second you go into a space that I pay for as a Virginia taxpayer and you endanger children, that's when we have to care. And I think that, this is not the same as 2021 because you don't have Biden inflation. You don't have, wokeness necessarily as a whole into overdrive. Mm-hmm. But Democrats still cannot say, this is a man and this is a criminal. And we need to develop a policy to make sure this never happens again. And so long as that is the case, I actually think especially Jason Miyares has a chance over Jay Jones.
You know what's kind of amazing about your answer? I agree with most of it. I'm not going to say I agreed with all of it. We've been talking about this question for 5 minutes now. And we've already forgot it's about Jay Jones's text messages.
Yeah,
so there's no way this is going to impact the results next November. But hey, we've been wrong before. That being said, that's our time for this week. Don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel. Go check out more of our great reporting at washingtonexaminer.com. I'm Christian Daytalk.
And I'm Tiana Lowe Desher.
And we'll see you guys next week.